Welcome to another episode of Southern Arizona Nonprofits, the superheroes impacting our community. This is brought to you today by SKIP, SSCIP, the Social Service Contractors Indemnity Pool that's been covering nonprofits for more than 40 years. This is Barbara McClure, your host today, and I have with us two local leaders of nonprofits that have been very busy during the COVID season. I have with me Meghan Heddings, who is the Executive Director of Family Housing Resources. I always want to get that backwards. And also with me, Dr. John Arnold of PPEP, which is PPEP, Portable Practical Educational Preparation. So thank you both for being with me here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You bet. We're talking about the critical services that have been going on for the last year. It's hard to believe we've come all the way through a year of COVID. But I know PPEP from Impact to Southern Arizona, because when I first got to the organization, we were housing PPEP's classes in one of our buildings. So they would come up weekly to provide services for our community in the rural community. So, John, I thought it would be fun for you to tell us what you're doing with food. I know right now you've got a lot of people you're feeding, and there's quite a bit going on.
Well, the rural areas have been in a pandemic for the last 50 years. Our services are last on anybody's list. Our roads are the worst, and we have, just because of the distances between our communities, there's just no access to services. And so we've tried to fulfill that void in the last 50 years, starting in an old school bus named La Tortuga and driving around to the farm labor camps up until we're still driving around for the food security. Every Thursday we practically visit every one of those original communities that we first started in, taking food boxes through the Farmers the Family program, where USDA is buying the food that would ordinarily go to restaurants, putting them into food boxes. Each food box weighs about 35 pounds, enough to feed 4 people for a whole week. So with our organization and our staff, we take turns and we go out and we load up a truck, it's a refrigerated semi that we take, and it goes out to deliver these boxes. Last Thursday, we handed out boxes benefiting 2,400 people. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you look in the rural context, that is a huge, huge amount of resources going out there. We start around 7 in the morning with our partner, the 3,000 Club, and we have a lot of thanks to Pam Boyer and that wonderful organization for what they do. And we partner to distribute the food, so that's where that's going on. So we hit the areas of Marana, Rillito, South Tucson, Amado, Arivaca, and then we swing around to my hometown, which is Patagonia, Arizona. So, and then come back. Then I load up my Prius and we take out food boxes to about 40 refugees in that evening and get home. Time for dinner.
That's a long Thursday.
So that's food security on Thursday.
Sure. Well, that's a lot of people you're serving, really. And I know Meghan and I know each other originally through the Community Food Bank, because she worked there for many years. And then Impact, of course, is an agency of the Community Food Bank and United Food Bank as well. So we are all very familiar with food service. But 2,400 people in a day does not sound like a small number.
No, it does not. That's a large number.
That is, and we appreciate what you do. I know you also have an Arivaca garden. Maybe you could tell me some of that story.
Well, yes, back in 1972, I was driving with a friend of mine, and he had just come back from Vietnam. We saw they were selling 40-acre parcels down there, and for about $400 an acre, and I thought that sounded pretty good. And there was a creek that went through it, and myself and my partner bought the property and split it up later when we both got married. And then he did a little bit of cattle grazing there with Black Angus, and then that fertilized and laid the platform for an organic garden later on, which we're benefiting from that particular episode. And the garden today, my family has turned it over to our PEP organization to operate, and they have some two 90-foot greenhouses. They're air-cooled by evaporative cooling, so we can do things a year round. And it seems like we're not only feeding people, but we're feeding the javelina and deer, which down there this year because they could go through metal fences, we found out, and
Oh, gosh.
they're hungry. So we try to accommodate all creatures here. But we do believe in vegan conscientious farming. On our website, ppep.org, you can find a primer that is probably one of the best ever produced, and how to do your own conscientious vegan farming. And that is something I think is very, very important, that we need to move to that. Just one cow takes up about 14 acres, and you could feed the world 10 times over if we weren't producing so much beef. So that's something maybe just to consider. But organic farming, and also we've branched down into Cameroon. We have 54 farms under our microloan program, basically in a conflict area between the Anglophone and the Frenchphone folks that are in conflict. Our farms are keeping the people from starving. We have through Rotary, we started really a nice one in Ghana, my wife's home country. And then in Liberia, ground zero, where Ebola emerged, we are now producing rice. So a little bit of this and that. And, we try to, food security knows no boundaries, and so we have to be very conscious of that.
Well, I think it's great you're serving not just Tucson, but international areas as well. That's pretty cool. Really a superhero in the food business, it sounds like.
Well, I think there's several that you have to recognize. We talked about the 3000 Club and Pam Boyer. Sure. Also, Eric Scheidel with the Gilbert Food Bank. They're up in Phoenix, but they also have a branch down here across from Pio Decimo on South 6th. They are one of the major providers statewide of food boxes, and they're a great team to work with. So there's a good network, and we have a great network in each of our rural communities. We have our own board members that are from those areas. That's how we get our boards. And they help set up the volunteers, and we get there, we unload, they distribute. So it's a very efficient operation in the rural areas. It's interesting when you get to Arivaca, you wouldn't think you need 2 sheriff cars are there to direct traffic, but you can see the line as far as you can see. And it's hunger is a real issue right now, and people are not aware of it. But hunger has always been an issue in the rural areas. It's not just hunger for food, but it's good food, and that's what. And a lot of our brothers and sisters on the nations, they cannot get good water, so they have to buy these huge 18-ounce sodas and things like that and that has its effects on health. So it is an issue of not only hunger, but having access to good sanitary and healthy food.
Sure. I know at Impact we've had, we've really evolved, and we now have a really large grocery rescue, I guess, base, if you want to call it that. But recently, the produce that's been coming in looks gorgeous. It's just like it's right off the market's primary shelf.
Wow.
And that
So
is
it's nice.
exactly, if you look at these food boxes, they're 35 pounds, as I mentioned, but they have a bag of potatoes from Idaho. They have apples. They have yogurt. They have 2 kinds of meats in there that are pre-cooked. I mean, that's a high-quality puree that would go to restaurants, And then they have cottage cheeses and veggies and everything. You would be amazed at the quality of food. And I really give credit to USDA for having the foresight of keeping the farmers going, but keeping the families going as well. And I think all this nutrition starts at the home level. We can preach all we want. I'm very fortunate to be married to a Ghanaian woman who came from the rainforest area, grew up in the natural ways, and we were both vegan, and I think that's what attracted us, and that it really, I think, projects forward with our children. They are all healthy, and they are all doing well, and I think all comes back to eating well, resting well, and being happy.
There you go. I think that's a good combination. I think, too, for us at Impact, there's that whole other part, as you were saying, people are they're hungry, but also it's about dignity and respect. And for us, it's really important to give people high-quality food and not just vegetables that look like they've got a day left on them or wilted and things like that. So it's feeds their soul as well as their bellies, which is important. Yeah. Well, I know Megan, as I had said, worked for the food bank as well, a community food bank. So we've all connected through food for sure. But I know right now the big thing in the news and kind of in our concerns with our clients are all these issues around housing. And of course, we came through COVID with all these wonderful opportunities for people to stay in place, but then they didn't keep up on their rents, and that's been pretty concerning, especially as all those moratoriums begin to lift.
Yes.
So, Megan, what are you doing over there at the Family Housing Resources to help people through this?
Well, thanks for asking. It's definitely challenging times, I think, coming from a background working at the community food bank and with all the wonderful partners, and understanding how great the need of food insecurity was prior to the pandemic. I think it relates to all of the other basic needs, and housing being one of those critical areas. And so at Family Housing Resources, we've been really, we kind of pivoted and shifted quickly to respond to the needs of housing during the pandemic. And a big part of that has been through rental assistance. So we did see, a lot of concerns about being able to pay rent. We have a lot of both our tenants at our properties as well as outside in the community coming to us and asking for help. They had lost their jobs initially or had been impacted by increased financial expenses, medical expenses, folks that had COVID and sort of got knocked down and really struggled to get back up. And so we've been really fortunate to have a sort of a seed fund for rental assistance and put that in place. And then we were also able to partner with both the city and the county on the initial CARES funds. Mm-hmm. And so we've been a service agency to getting out both rental assistance and utility assistance, which is equally as important right now. So those programs are sort of a emergency stopgap just to help get people through so they don't lose housing. We face these, as you said, those moratoriums running out to their dates that were supposed to end. And luckily, the state of Arizona governor early on in the pandemic did put in place a second moratorium that really helped to protect folks. But there's been other states that didn't do that. And now there's clear indication that the rates of death were highly increased in states that didn't carry forward any moratoriums, didn't carry forward that protection. And it's because housing is critical. It's critical for your safety, for your well-being, and in this case, for your ability to stay healthy. So, we're passionate about it. We think, you need housing first before you can go out and start to seek some of those additional services before, so that you can go out and start finding job support, food support, those other types of activities. So we are here to sort of continue that fight. We are still working with CIC, which is Community Investment Corporation, on the city and county funds now. They have about $24 million that they're distributing in rental assistance and utility assistance at this moment. So,
gosh, and is it easy to get a hold of? We've been passing those flyers out through the food bank, but I think the demand is going to be so high. It's
really hard process, and I would say, there's been such lapse in coverage. So at the end of November, the county program ended, and the city program had been closed for a while, just working through a wait list. And so there's been people on a wait list, and those are the ones that are getting served first. They've sort of done a good job of being able to identify who's highest risk, who's most at risk of eviction at this moment, and trying to serve those people first. But it is going to be challenging. I think the number of individuals seeking assistance and the number, and how long it takes to go through the process, we're looking at a couple months. And so even though there are funds there, it requires that protection so people don't get evicted while they're waiting for the support that's available.
Sure. Is there transitional housing available in Tucson that you know of for those people who have lost their home while they're waiting?
Yeah, that's, I would say, even harder.
Sure.
Frankly. So there is the city does have some programs. They have been doing some hotel vouchers, and they have some programs to do that. Although what I see as our biggest concern is really supply. So at this point, there are even some rehousing dollars. So, if you did get evicted, that there is some support available for rehousing. And the issue comes down to an inability to find open units to find that housing opportunity that we can get people in that's truly affordable. We have, prices have also increased significantly over the last year in both housing for rental and for purchase. And it's quite astonishing. I think that what we're looking at is going to cause problems for folks for years to come.
Even one of our staff members was saying the other day that she's in an apartment and the rent, and her lease is up, and she was saying that the rent on, say, an $800 apartment has gone up $150.
Yeah.
It was really surprising to me, because I thought right now when everybody's struggling, you would think it's just supply and demand, I'm sure, but it was tough
and I
to
think
hear.
this pandemic has separated that gap even more. So, what's crushing to me is the fact that we're seeing a greater divide. And so those that, maybe already had housing or had secondary housing and are able to sell are making significant money because the market is booming. And then those that are at the lower end are being pushed even farther out of the option. So it's a bit devastating right now when we're working in housing.
That's tough. Do you have a sense of numbers, like how many people are coming to you for help right now?
Not necessarily through us. I would say on the wait list for the rental assistance, I think it's almost at, in the last I heard, I think it was almost at 7,000 that have sought assistance. Yeah, and that's through since November. And so we don't know how many people are actually eligible, but we would assume a pretty high number of those are actually eligible. It is an income-based program, so you do have to qualify. I think it's 80% of area median income is what the current program is looking at. But it's high. It just continues to grow. And I think what is really unfortunate is, again, individuals that have been able to maintain their job, maybe have been able to work remotely. They've kept some stability and security. And those that lost their job, it's just been ongoing now for over a year.
Sure. I imagine that's tough, too. And I don't see how they get back to work right away. I mean, I know we're starting to reopen, but are you seeing that, John? Are you seeing people that you're
we have
serving?
the same program with the rental and utility assistance. We're getting 40 to 80 calls a day in our network here. We've opened our own office just for that program over on Ajo Way near Park, and we're just overwhelmed. There's only so much we can do. Back to housing. Housing is a very critical issue in the rural areas. We started out with doing self-help housing, and where basically USDA would give a family enough for a mortgage, but that would be to buy materials, but we would supervise them in building their own homes.
Oh, my goodness.
And that grew, and in 1990, HUD asked us to do a 4-state program to build under SHOP self-help housing. So we built about 600 units between Hawaii and New Mexico, Colorado, and here in Arizona. And it was giving people that were farm workers primarily the resources to build and then to supervise these subdivisions. We just finished one in Hana, Maui, Hawaii, about 14 units over there, and the families built those homes. But the nice thing about that is they learn how to take care of their home.
Sure. I mentioned the pride in that.
Yeah, well, and it also saves a lot of money in repairs. But I really congratulate the work that Megan's doing, and her program is extremely important in our community.
Yeah, it is. Those numbers are so crazy. They're almost difficult to fathom. Even 40 to 80 calls a day, but it's 7,000 people in line for assistance. That's a huge number.
Well, and I think that's really probably very understated. So, that was the number of individuals that have been on there prior to really any awareness that the program was open and out there.
Right.
So I do think that the need is significantly higher, and people aren't quite aware yet what's available.
Yeah, we have a little newsletter that goes out to our community, and we had that up as our resource last month. So that people could share with people they know, because, really that's hitting a lot of people. It's not just people who were already struggling in some poverty.
Correct.
It's people who had six-figure salaries who got laid off, who didn't have enough savings. And so it's really kind of massive across the board.
Yeah, and housing is such a, we all need it. We all need housing. We all need, just like food, it's the same basic need that is critical. And so to not have access to something that you can afford is really pretty devastating. And I do want to mention, Barbara, one of the critical things that we're trying to get awareness out right now about is actually the CDC eviction moratorium. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the individuals we'll talk to, that's kind of our first question is, have you provided your landlord with the declaration that you need to be covered and that, with this moratorium, and that you are having these struggles based on a COVID response. And a lot of folks don't know that. They think they're automatically covered, and they're not. And so I would ask that, anyone that can, we're trying to get the word out that you do need to make sure that you have provided your landlord with that declaration notice so that you're covered, so that you will not be evicted through the process because you've provided that notice.
It is good to know, because I know in our community, and we're up in Northwest Tucson, so we're providing services in rural Catalina, but also into Pinal County. And there are some landlords who are evicting people. And I keep thinking, oh my gosh, how can they get away with that? But that's an important step to realize.
There's a lot that's come out in this process also that I think is pretty devastating to see. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and it's challenging. I mean, I understand from a landlord's perspective, and we at Family Housing Resources, we are a landlord as well. And so, it's a struggle, and especially a lot of those smaller mom and pops, that might own a house, a second home that they rent out, they're going to be significantly impacted without that income that they potentially rely on. A lot of folks, that's maybe their passive income that they live off of. And so, it's critical that there is that support and that need. And so I understand it from their perspective, but we also want to make sure that there's not those landlords that are kind of taking advantage of some of the systems. And there is some devastating numbers right now, I think, within Pima County, just in terms of some of the evictions that have proceeded. We're seeing that some of the process can take 2 minutes, less than 2 minutes for them to receive their eviction. There's a lot of struggles. A lot of them are on Zoom still, and they're having technical difficulties. And once it's done, it's done. And that eviction order has been placed. There's not a lot to do. And so it's a little bit sad to see how quickly that goes. And I think there is a lot of work that we can do in the future to try and have some better support programs for tenants to be able to speak up on what's happening.
That is important, I think, like you're saying, the education part of it. Mm-hmm. And for me, I was surprised to learn that when you have an eviction, then it's like your credit. Mm-hmm. Eviction ends up on your rental credit, if you will. And once you've had an eviction, it's hard to get another spot, even if it was unjust. So I'm seeing that. That's kind of concerning.
Well, one of the things that worries me, though, this is going to get worse. If you look out in the parking lot, wherever you go, look at all the California licenses, the people coming in,
investors
who are now taking a lot of those spots that you were talking about, Megan, and a lot of the rentals and things. And that's going to not get better, unfortunately. Prices are going way out. There's a lot of industry coming in to Tucson. Those people are going to need housing. And it's the people on the lower end that I worry about, that they're going to be facing that particularly. We have 2 properties, one in Marana, and our waiting list, we have 18 units, and we have about 100 people waiting there. And then in Benson, we have one that's a senior HUD 202 project, 31 units, and we at least have that many down there, too, in Benson, waiting to get in. And it's just, we wish we could help everybody.
Agreed.
And the resources are going other places rather than where they really need to be going, and that's very unfortunate. Housing has got to be a priority. Food's got to be a priority. And the basic getting back the jobs and our economy going again. We've been the intermediary lender for SBA. We have 67% of the state of Arizona. Been doing that since 1985. And right now we're doing everything we can to protect our businesses.
I know. I like your microloan story, your microloan program.
Well, it's one that started with the Ford Foundation, gave us $500,000 to capitalize our loan fund. And in 1999, we were recognized at the White House as the first CDFI, Community Development Finance Institution, which amounts to being a poor people's bank, if you want to look at it that way.
Well, they'll appreciate that.
Important.
But right now, the stress on our businesses, if it wasn't for stimulus,
Yeah.
we'd lose most of our portfolio. And I'm worried about when that stops, what's going to happen to them. The nice thing about microlending is it provides not only access to capital, but it does give technical assistance, and that's where we're emphasizing a lot of our work and right now and working with getting them ready for that time going forward. But we're making a number of loans as we go. We're probably a little bit ahead of where we were last year, but we're being very careful. We have a loan review committee. It's independent, and they look at all the aspects that, around the family and its viability of that business going to be in the new pandemic era. Is it going to survive?
That's true, too, yeah.
Yeah, so those are things. But microlending is very, very important.
Critical.
We started microlending in Maui, Hawaii, several years ago. It's all 7 islands now. We don't stay with these programs. Our job's to organize and then train and then turn programs over, just like we did the housing ones that I mentioned earlier. This is why we're able to diversify and keep moving and being able to test more fertile ground as we go. But, there's a lot of worries on the horizon, especially with the influx of people, because they have the dollars to buy out the lower income.
Sure. Mm-hmm. I think one of the nice things, too, about your program is that a lot of people, we have clients who say to us, well, we didn't think we could ever get a home loan.
Yes.
And we do have a really wonderful mortgage broker that we work with who has been able to get our clients put up. But I think the other thing that's nice about PPEP is that you help people. They can come to you, and if they're not ready, you help them get ready and help them build credit and give them those tools.
Or build a house. We had one lady in Sarita, I remember, with her 12-year-old daughter build her 2-bedroom house. This was back in the 80s, and I drove by the other day, and the house looks wonderful. Of course, the kid's probably grown up by now, but
sure. It's pride of ownership.
It is a legacy of what can be done.
Absolutely.
We have a lot of other issues that we have to look in our environment right now, globally as well. My wife's village, just this last week in Ghana, there was a microburst, destroyed most of the homes.
Oh, no.
And they used to be in the middle of a beautiful forest with 200-year-old silk trees. And I kept warning you cut down those trees, and there's nothing to stop the wind. So we have deforestation. That same wind crosses the ocean, and we get the same. That's where our hurricanes come from. So it's an interesting how the domino effect in one country can also affect what we're doing here. And, of course, conversely, what we do here can affect Mexico and other places like that. And I really think that I grew up in Mexico, actually, when I was 4 years old, moved there and got to appreciate the culture and the country. And then when I started PEP, my first 6 years was teaching Bracero migrant workers that were here under a work program. And they built Arizona is the 5th largest agricultural state in the nation, the winter vegetable capital of North America.
That always surprised me when I first got here.
Well, it's like the River Nile over there. It's a beautiful area.
Sure. And
it's the farm workers that I think President Madison said those societies that honor the people that toil the fields shall endure. And if you look at the Mesopotamia, you look at all those areas, the Pope just visited. It's the Sumerians. They were all built in the same kind of a nature and natural environment as Yuma. And I feel that's an area that's going to really grow. They're the only place left in the state where you have water and you have land. So you put all these little things together. I know it sounds like a little scatter there, but they are like a puzzle. You have to put them together to really see what's going on in this environment.
Sure. I think it's and Yuma is such an interesting place. It's a great drive. To drive through it and see all those vegetables. And it's shocking what they bring. But I would like to just break for a quick minute because we have a quick conversation from one of our SCIP representatives who wants to share some information, and we'll be right back.
Today's program is brought to you by SCIP, the Social Service Contractors Indemnity Pool. SKIP is a member-owned, member-directed insurance provider with more than 3 decades of insuring Arizona social service organizations for their property, general and professional liability, and auto claim exposures. With an Arizona-based staff of claim underwriting and risk management professionals, SKIP specializes in providing personalized service, affordable premiums, and coverage which meets and often exceeds the state of Arizona's contract requirements for social service providers. For more information, visit our website at www.sscip.org or ask your insurance agent about protecting your organization with insurance coverage through SKIP.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you to SKIP for sponsoring our show today. And I was talking just before the break about Yuma, and your comment, John, about the vegetable capital. I think that, I don't remember the statistic, but maybe you do, the amount of the country's lettuce that comes from here. And, when we moved here from Seattle and saw the same housing issue that you were talking about, we moved in the 90s, and the prices went crazy and skyrocketed. And, I'm sure all of that's coming. And so we decided to move down here. We already had a plan because it was a little too gray and wet and not quite the weather we were looking for in a long term.
The opposite here.
Exactly. We're hot weather fans, so this is the perfect place for us. But, to drive through Yuma and see all of that lettuce crop growing, and I don't know, do you know the statistic of how much of the agriculture, those produce?
Well, it is a winter vegetable capital, so the majority would be very easy to say that.
Sure.
There's a area between Yuma, there's 2 towns, Somerton and San Luis on the border. And several thousand farm workers come in every day. They have permits. They start about 2 in the morning. They cross, and they get on buses, and they go up in the fields and work, come back, probably around 10, 11, 12, because after that it gets too hot.
Sure.
And so these are the people that I see as the real heroes and warriors.
I agree.
And I have 2 charter schools out there, public charter schools, one in Somerton, San Luis. And last month, NBC came down with Telemundo and followed 2 of our girls. Their parents had been deported, and they stayed with their younger siblings. And these 2 our students in our charter school were keeping their family going. And they would get up at 2 in the morning to go catch the bus and work until about 7, then come to school, then go home and, feed their family and migrant children. That's why they are so important to us. And that little documentary showed for 5 minutes on the NBC morning show, and millions of people saw. And I think it opened the eyes that these people are the real heroes, and the reason we have the society that we do, it's the farm workers, and that's why we celebrated just last week Cesar Chavez's birthday. I was with him in 1978, and with him 1993 in Denver the month before he passed away. And I saw what he had done with the farm workers to give them an opportunity to have a good, safe environment and have a decent wage. Because if our farm workers are not healthy, and that's one issue we have in Yuma right now, there's a resistance to giving farm workers. Why should we give farm workers, vaccinations when the snowbirds need it? Well, we both need it, of course, but we better remember it's the farm workers that are putting the food on our table. And I think we've forgotten this very important segment. That's why PEP's known as a migrant seasonal farm worker organization.
Well, maybe you can check in with the county. We at Impact, we collaborated with the county and did a vaccine clinic. And in the month of March and April, we vaccinated 890 people.
That's great.
So, but it was because up in the Northwest, there's so many seniors who, are either technologically not savvy enough to get an appointment, or that they don't really drive or couldn't be driving downtown. So it was really important for that community. So there needs to be somebody to step up and maybe figure out how to get those farm workers.
Now in Arivaca, we've had 2 clinics. We just had our last one last week. We have a place called the Action Center, and we pretty much got everybody vaccinated.
Great.
But once again, they're not farm workers, but they're rural people.
Sure.
And this is where we have to start looking. If you drop a pebble into a pond, PEP's idea is go to the furthest ripple and work back in. Whereas right now, most of the philosophy is we start with these big urban centers and hope something gets out to and it doesn't. So that's why I think we found our niche over the last 55 years, trying in our small way, like a drop in the bucket, to reverse that trend.
And I think that's the same with Impact. We are out in a rural community, and so even our logo is that drop in the bucket with the ripples around it, because we know that access to one simple resource can change a life, and it just has a ripple effect throughout so many different areas of someone's being. So back to resources, Meghan, what do you think is the biggest barrier to home ownership for most low to moderate income families?
Well, I love that Dr. Arnold was talking about the access to capital. I mean, that's huge. And so I do think that understanding your credit, building all of the education and awareness that it takes, I mean, that's part of the system that exists today. It might not be the best system, but it is currently the system that you have to play in to be able to purchase a home. So you have to go through the process. Very few people, especially low income, have ability to just purchase a house outright. So it takes sort of understanding the process, understanding your credit, how to position yourself well so that you will be able to get loans, that you can go through that process. And then really what we see as the biggest barrier is down payment. So having the savings to be able to purchase a home and putting potentially up to 20% down is almost impossible for a lot of folks that are really sort of just living paycheck to paycheck. And so that's one of the ways that we're able to help, is we tie people into what down payment assistance is available and get them access. And for some people, it can be a significant amount of funds. So when we combine some of those programs, I mean, we've seen some individuals receive up to $40,000 for a down payment.
That's terrific.
Which is huge. Yeah, it makes, it actually makes it a realistic dream to get into homeownership and to get into that new reality. And frankly, where we're at today, just because you can't afford to rent or to purchase a home, doesn't mean you can afford to rent any longer. I think we're seeing such enormous increases that sometimes it actually can be more affordable to purchase, but you need that support to get there. You need that down payment. You need the ability to get into a home and to find a home.
And that was something my husband and I noticed recently. Some houses went up for rent in the neighborhood, and one of the neighbors has a child with some children who's looking for a place to rent, to move in closer. And of course, even at Impact, we have a lot of people who are moving in with family members to be able to afford a rent. But we were commenting on some of the rents and thinking, gosh, that could be a house payment.
Yeah.
I mean, it is amazing. But like you said, without the down payment.
Yeah. Well, and as John said, I think we are seeing a lot of investors coming in and purchasing up properties, and we're losing a lot of the affordable properties. It's happening. There was just an article in Tucson, newspaper Tucson.com, that talked about this, and a poor family that was renting for over 30 years, and the house was sold out from under them and led to some pretty sad outcomes. But, I think also Tucson recently just made the list globally for having the biggest loss in affordable housing and rental housing, which is not what we want to be known for. I think, becoming less and less of an affordable community is the wrong direction, unfortunately. And we already saw a lot of these problems prior to the pandemic, and it's sad to see it just getting worse.
So what do you think is the solution? I mean, I liked your comment, Sean, about, we'll just teach people how to build houses, but of course you have to have the property and then all of those resources. Yeah. Exactly.
There's a number of solutions, I think, and I think as John also stated, it takes probably looking. You can't just look at one solution. It's got to be a bit broader, and all of this is so integrated. I think even right now, the cost of supplies for purchase, so wood, lumber, all of that has increased so significantly that building new homes are going to go up. So I think it's going to take a lot of efforts. I think more collaboration across organizations, probably with the county and the city as well, coming together and working on solutions and getting a bit more creative than we have been potentially in the past. And we need some major investment in that. So, right now, I think there's a big push to try and get additional resources to the State Housing Trust Fund, and I think that's critical. It will help bring some of that capital in to building new affordable housing. But I think we have to really speak up about the need out there and that this is critical. If we're only, right now it's in someone's interest to do higher end, and the hope is that there will be sort of this trickle down or funnel down of affordable property, because if you build the higher end, then people will move up into their second home and purchase, and then that'll free up the property they were in for more affordable. But the reality is it's not affordable anymore. I mean, so in 2018, the average sale price in Tucson for a home was around $230,000, and in 2021, in February, it was $310,000. So that increase in less than 2 years is just pretty staggering. And so we need to be able to properly, mass produce some of these houses to be able to look at things a little bit differently than we did before. Not be so afraid of doing some of these multifamily complexes in areas more around town. We are, oddly enough, for a community that's so spread out and that had so much land for so long, I think we all are aware that there's not a lot of land left other than in rural areas. And I don't know that that's, we don't necessarily need to continue to spread out. We need to just think about the model slightly different.
Well, and that's something that I have a lot of conversations with Dave Perry, who's the president of the Oro Valley Chamber, about, is it's one thing to build affordable housing, but it has to be accessible.
Yes.
So we say that word needs to be interchanged. We need to say we need accessible housing.
Yes.
Because you can't just build it out. You can't build these affordable houses in a place that developers think is affordable to build in. But then
and if it increases
no jobs.
costs for transportation and your ability to get anywhere, and you don't have access to childcare and other resources or schooling, I mean, then it's no longer affordable.
Exactly.
Agreed.
And so that's the other thing. And I know even in Catalina, we've had an apartment complex that wanted to go in when we moved in there probably 12 years ago. But the people in the community don't really want an apartment complex. And I know
NIMBY is real, not in my backyard.
It really is. Yeah. And, with the idea that with an apartment complex must come some shady activity. And it's really too bad, because I think maybe there's education that needs to be done in the greater population on that, too.
Agreed.
I think there's something we really have to look at, not just for the long term, but we're running out of, first of all, we have a state with very little private land. Most of it's owned by the government, Bureau of Land Management, et cetera, national forests, Native American nations. But we're running out of water. I know even up in the Phoenix area, there's some developers trying to buy out CAP water, CAP water. And and if you ever flown over the reservoir up at Lake Mead, it's down 1,000 feet. Almost to the point where they will no longer produce electricity, have the capacity to do that. So if we don't start getting a little bit smarter and keep overbuilding without planning, I mean, there's plenty of room for growth, but it has to be very carefully thought out, and we've got to watch the water resources, or that's going to bring the whole house down.
Very good point. It needs to be intentional.
Yeah.
And then the drought has all these other ramifications, the air quality. If you see, my wife and I like to go hiking a lot up in the mountains here, and watching how even the desert plants are not surviving. The animals are, the javelinas are desperate. They coming into the neighborhoods, and coyotes, people. We're just seeing a real crunch here, and all these visuals are around us showing us we're in trouble, but we don't seem to be reacting, but we are in trouble.
Yeah, and I agree, and water is such a hot topic in this state, and it is really hard to divide it up when you're in charge of that kind of thing, and you've got all these different people coming who need it. So that is a huge challenge for Arizona for sure. Gosh, it's even the fires, to your point. Last year we had so many fires, and not just in Arizona, but our Bighorn fire. And with the drought, you're right. What did we have? Not even 5 inches of rain last year or something?
I think it was 4 inches, I just heard the other day.
And
those extremes, I think that's right. The extremes are going to continue to be extreme. So 1 year of serious drought and the next year of potential flood. And so that's a little scary.
Daunting. Well, how about, is there anything else you want to add about Family Housing Resources, Meghan? I want to make sure. I'm curious about how you're both funded, because I know some of it is pass-through money, and during COVID, we had a lot of access, as you say, to great funds to help us. But it's just a challenge to raise funds for things. So I'm curious how you fund your...
It is, and this is an area that we're looking to grow. So I think we definitely are looking for more donations to help continue the work that we're doing. Right now, we did have a small amount that is actually coming because we're a HUD housing counseling agency. We do have a small amount that's supported and funded from HUD directly.
Sure.
But I think that their desire is to support less than 10% of our total costs, program costs.
That's not much.
Not much at all. And so... So unfortunately, we definitely need additional support to continue the work that we're doing. And that really goes towards those counselors, which are really critical for providing the sort of advocacy and sort of peer support to get you the information and knowledge needed. And then we also do receive some funds that support us through our property management. So as I stated, we do have some apartment complexes that we own and operate. And so some of that, those funds help to carry forward the work that we're doing. But with all the rental assistance now, we're really looking at philanthropy to help support a big part of what we're doing. As you stated, there has been all these funds coming through right now because of the stimulus. And those are really just covering cost, which is what we're trying to do. But to really get in front of the problems, I think we need to be able to grow capacity greater than we have.
Sure. And I noticed that was a challenge for us in 2020.
Yes.
Because, of course, food banks were all over the news. So people were very generous in supporting food banks. But I think even though food is still critical, that housing piece to me seems to be the next big wave, or this kind of tidal wave that's going to hit us.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate because the investment it takes in making a change is large, unfortunately. And so I think there's things we need to do to get a bit more creative. To make sure that those costs stay down so that we don't have to increase costs on individuals that need our help. But yeah, I think it does take, coming from food, as you said, coming from food to housing, it's shocking to me how few people were able to assist with significantly more funds just because of what it takes to get that aid.
Sure. Yeah. We need some partners.
On the funding side, we've used EDA, the Economic Development Administration, HUD, for the self-help housing, and USDA is a very viable rural area. So we were offered $2.8 million in stimulus. We turned it down and felt we did not want to. We felt other groups such as Meghan's and others really needed it, and we had watched our dollars well, and we didn't lay anybody off.
Wonderful.
PEP never shut down. Our biggest problem is finding a parking space. I've been parking in the street the last week because everybody's working, and we have a committed board of directors in that area. So those are just a little bit of philosophical points there. And I want to share one thing I think is very important on the medical side. We haven't hit too much on that, but we started a program helping people with medical equipment and walkers and wheelchairs. And then we found another partner, PSMA. It was called Southwest Medical Aid. They merged under one of our programs. We created a distribution center, and we send hundreds of thousands of pounds of durable and non-durable medical supplies. We have up to 28 doctors and nurses that are retired that sort through everything at our distribution center. We just sent a cargo container to Honduras and we actually partnered with the Catholic Church, has a program in that, and we're sending another one to Ghana. But most of our work's here. We supply El Rio, we supply the Tucson fire departments. People come back and forth. So if you have any wheelchairs or in your storage room or walkers or crutches or any other kind of equipment, we can certainly use it. Just right across the border, we're working with a couple dozen clinics down there. Some are on part of the TO Nation, which is part of Mexico. And they built nice clinic buildings, but didn't give them a stitch of equipment. So we've been supplying those. And all of this is pure volunteer. There's no money in this. Our executive director, we say, is the highest paid executive director. They haven't quite reached a penny yet. And so anyway, those are the kinds of things that I think I point that out is very important, just like the food security. Mm-hmm. We do this all on the volunteer thing. Sure. And we serve thousands of people. If the government was going to try to serve thousands of people, how much would they charge a head?
Oh, it would be so costly.
Yeah,
That's so true.
And talking about the life changer, I have pictures that I brought today, visuals I'm leaving. One wheelchair is a life changer down in Agua Prieta, across the border from Douglas. We've been helping the hospital there. Mm. And they've been what they get from us, they help supply the other clinics down the Rio Sonora area. But one young man got a wheelchair. He'd been laying on the floor and sleeping on a mat and everything. But to see the smile on his face to get that wheelchair, that's a real life changer. So I see a lot of things that are happening today that don't need government money.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
They just need people,
mm-hmm.
and people that care, and people that are willing to, as you said, the social investors. Those are very important for us. The faith-based groups are mm-hmm. very important for us. And we all need to be united and realize it's not always the government money that's going to do things. Even in our work in Central America, Mexico, and in Africa, we don't use any of our program funds. We get all of that donated.
Sure.
And we don't get government money in any of those countries. We organize people under the old community action model that came out of the Civil Rights Act mm-hmm. in 1964, which taught people to help themselves and to do sweat equity.
Well, this is really the whole point of this show for me, is to connect these nonprofits, our superheroes really in the community, with the community members and with each other, because we have thousands of nonprofits in Tucson.
Yes.
And, there's so many of us are doing things that the community does not even realize we're doing.
Yes.
And they think of us like PPEP
in one,
having one general program.
I've learned a lot today.
Definitely. And I think that that's the idea, that how can we help our listeners find a connection to the things that they're passionate about.
Yeah.
And even that one thing, John, about the medical equipment, you're talking gently used equipment is okay. Mm-hmm. And we used to deal in some of that, and then we didn't have the space to store mm-hmm. it. And Impact lives in the retirement community. Mm-hmm. So we would get 1 million walkers donated because someone would have a surgery and then they would be provided with a walker, just the basic walker. But then when they were recovered, they would come down to us and say, can you pass this mm-hmm. on? And so that is great to know, because I think there's a lot of the durable medical mm-hmm. groups or people that did that have kind of gone to the wayside.
Yeah. We really need equipment. We're getting so overwhelmed right now, and we're getting things out of Phoenix, everywhere.
So overwhelmed with need, not overwhelmed with equipment.
We need equipment, and the need is there to provide that equipment. So if you have a wheelchair, if you have a walker, those are life changers in many areas that we're working in, especially in the Native American reservations. Mm-hmm. Right now, there's a lot of need for those kinds of things. Our website, which is ppep.org, you can kind of hone in on where we are with some of those things.
Sure. And on this, with the podcast, there's a web page for the show. So our listeners will be able to connect with Meghan and with Dr. John Arnold, and they'll be able to get the information for the nonprofit websites and the Facebook and all those things to
I want to make one other comment during this process, and I love your sort of thought on this, Barbara, of trying to connect us so that we can have greater reach and impact, and we don't all have to reinvent the wheel. We can rely on each other to, help support the work that we're doing. But I also have been actually really pleased to see some of the collaboration that has come out from the pandemic in regards to some of the services. So, this has been a devastating year for a lot of people, but it's also pushed us to do things differently. And, in particular with the rental assistance, and there's been a large group that's been meeting every Monday through the county and the city, and a lot of us service agencies and a lot of the nonprofits coming together and talking through both the situations, the issues. Some of the constables that have to issue these evictions are there on the call. And it's actually been, I hate to say it, but it's really been nice to see, because we are coming together, talking about the situations and brainstorming together on some of the solutions in a way that we had not done before. And so this is a hard, challenging year, but I think there's been some positive that I hope to see us really kind of invest in going forward.
Well, it's a good point, because I think innovation really has come out this year. Yes,
I
John.
wanted to say one thing. We talked about the partnerships among the nonprofits, and we talked about EDA, USDA, but also the city and county have been all a long-term partner of ours. We were emphasizing the volunteer because that's what we were talking about, but I didn't mean in any way to leave out the great partnerships with the county and the city. And with South Tucson. South Tucson is a very special area that needs a lot of help right now.
Yeah.
Good people there. And once again, like rural people, we're kind of like the rich man with Lazarus, and under the table we're trying to catch all these crumbs. We just need to be brought to the top of the table. That's all we're asking as rural people, to have that kind of recognition and respect.
That's it. I think it's coming. I think you're right. All of COVID kind of put us in a new way of thinking, and having to collaborate and having to cover so many different people and needs, and everybody pivoted. So I think we will all find ourselves at the table very soon.
Yeah.
So I so appreciate you coming to be on the show today, both of you, and sharing all the things you're passionate about and that you're making such a big difference in for our community. So I think, is there anything, I think we're ready to wrap it up. Do you have any last hurrahs, something you want to say before we say goodbye?
Well, I just want to say thank you. I think it's fantastic that you're doing this show. I'm excited to connect again, and this is part of the Tucson joy, I think, is just we are a small community and a growing community, but this has been a pleasure to be here, and I just appreciate being able to speak about not only food insecurity and housing, but all the other issues that were kind of discussed today. It's hard to not recognize how related all of these issues are, and that we can't just think in a vacuum. We have to be creative and explore new opportunities.
Well, thank you.
And I just think the same thing what Meghan has said, but also that we got to be good stewards of the land, good stewards of the air, good stewards of the water, or all of this is going to come crushing down on top of us.
I think you're right. Good advice.
And you remember when the Pope visited and he visited Samaria, those were the first organized cities. As long as they are responsive and took care of their resources, and they were very desert like we were, they survived. But once that went away, when they forgot about their fundamentals and about their security and about their investment and about their climate and water, they went away. They're just dust now.
Well, we need to learn from history and not repeat it. Yeah. Exactly. Well, thank you again for being here, and for our listeners for listening and learning